Yeah, I was really lucky. I had this very little symptoms.
Right. Is this our meeting?
Got it from
It
me,
just started.
but,
Okay, great.
we didn't spread it.
I met you two at the beginning, so it's nice to see you and nice to see everybody online. Are you comfortable with me taking my mask off up here? Okay, I know my voice can project a little bit better this way. So thank you all for joining me today as we discuss the super fun topic of how we market during COVID-19. So a little bit about myself. I am Kambrya Blake. I am the marketing strategist at the Abbi agency. So I've been at the agency for just shy of 3 years now. Work with clients that run the gamut from consumer products to DMAs and everything in between. So I'm excited to have the opportunity to stop and talk with you guys today. Just to give you a bit of an overview about how I'm going to go throughout this presentation. It's a relatively short presentation, right around a half an hour. My goal is to open it up to all of you for specific questions at the end. If you need any clarification throughout the presentation, please don't hesitate to ask specific questions about your businesses. If we can wait until the end for those, that would be great. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So why is digital marketing important? Now you guys are here, so I don't have to sell it to you. But if there are any of you who are maybe a little bit on the fence about how much time and effort, how many of your resources to dedicate to digital over some more traditional methods of marketing, I'm just going to kind of go over my top bullet points of why I think it's so important, particularly in today's climate. Obviously, businesses face an ever-changing landscape regardless, right? Trends change, things happen. But right now with COVID-19, that makes the environment even more tumultuous than it normally is. One of the great things about digital marketing is that it offers businesses a chance to quickly shift messaging and to put updates out there. One of the things I like to liken it to is I know a lot of you are probably familiar with traditional advertising. Let's go with print, for example. A lot of print publications have a 1 to 2 week lead time. So by the time they receive your ad and it's published, maybe your hours of operation have changed, or perhaps your business is even shut down temporarily. So digital is great because it helps you overcome some of those obstacles that traditional media might pose. It also offers alternative to how things are traditionally done. So you were talking about your film festival earlier and the results that you've seen, being able to have online subscriptions and viewers who maybe wouldn't be there in person. So this applies for all kinds of businesses. Setting up online ordering and e-commerce is something that has been incredibly instrumental for a lot of businesses that have been hit by COVID. So one of my favorite local wine sellers had not previously had an online storefront. They implemented it, and that's kind of been what's kept them going through the hardest part of the pandemic. Distant services are also a great option as well. So things like consultations are huge online right now, as well as online customer service. Obviously, that's kind of a no-brainer. So everybody loves statistics, right? Stats are fun. So 90%. That is the percentage of internet users that Google Display Network reaches. So a lot of the conversations that I've had, particularly with small business owners, is, okay, so what platforms do I want to be involved on? 90%, I mean, that's a huge portion of the people that are online, right? So odds are your audience is somewhere that the Google Display Network will reach. So definitely a good one to keep in mind. And we'll get into platforms a little bit more as I go. So the expected total number of social media users by 2023 is projected to be 3.4 billion. Again, the odds of your clientele being on some form of social media, it's pretty big, right? So another great platform or another great avenue to take for digital marketing. So 70% of marketers are actively engaged in digital content marketing. So if you don't have a digital content marketing presence, you're missing out on a market share that your competitors are potentially edging you out of. So it's something really important to consider, even for those of you who have smaller businesses and maybe a smaller marketing budget. There's still ways that we can get you involved online. So before I get really into the nitty-gritty of my recommendations, my do's and don'ts for digital marketing, I think it's very important that everyone has a solid understanding of where they're at with their marketing, with their digital efforts currently. So know where you stand, right? One of the first things, if you haven't done so recently, I highly recommend you do this sooner rather than later, is to complete an audit of your current efforts. So for those of you who are part of corporate organizations, this might be a little bit more difficult than those of you who have smaller local level campaigns or businesses, but it's beneficial for everyone to do just to kind of get an idea of the overall nature of the marketing efforts that they're putting forward. So social channels are a big one that I recommend everyone should do an audit of. This is beneficial because it not only allows you to give yourself a cold, hard look and say, okay, like where are my shortcomings in this instance? I always recommend that people take a look at the platforms that they're on. Maybe you don't have a presence on a platform that would make sense for where your target audience is living. Take a look at the types of content that you've been putting out and the engagement rates and the reactions to those. Are there certain types of posts, maybe videos, tend to get more engagement than a static post or a reshare of a news article? It's a great way to kind of help you figure out how to move forward and continue to get good engagement from people by having an understanding of what it is that they're interested in. There are a lot of really great resources out there when it comes to performing audits. So a quick Google search, if you just looked up, social channel audit worksheet or something like that, it'll give you a lot of resources. So if you haven't done an audit before, I definitely recommend looking into existing templates and kind of working from there until you have an understanding of what it is you're looking for. And that applies for all of these, not just the social channels. Website is obviously another big one. For those of you in corporate organizations, you probably don't have as much control over your website as smaller businesses. But if you're in a position to provide feedback, that's always great to do so as well. So with your website, probably the most important thing that I can express is to make sure that your information is current. And I know that that sounds really, really rudimentary, but you would be surprised. I'm a big fan of takeout. So I've been spending a lot of time looking at websites and looking at menus, and hours are outdated. One thing to keep in mind too that I've noticed a lot, Google will list your business as being temporarily closed if it's something that you stopped due to COVID, and I've seen a lot of businesses forget to change that. So you could be potentially missing out on business if you forget to make these little adjustments to your website and to your Google My Business and programs like that. Obviously, and again, we'll get into this a little bit more once we get into websites, you're going to want to check for things like site speed. Does it take a really long time to load? Is it mobile friendly? Is it easy for you to find the information that you need to find? Is there a search bar? Just think about it from the perspective of a consumer. If you were a consumer and you were going onto your website, would you be able to get where you needed to go? Your current marketing efforts. So maybe some of you are currently marketing and some of you aren't. I think that there is a tendency, and I can be guilty of this too, that when you are looking at your marketing efforts, a lot of times we'll look at what I call vanity metrics. So that would be something like, let's say we're advertising on a social media platform. Yes, it's great if we're getting a lot of engagement, and yes, it's absolutely wonderful if people are watching a good portion of our video. If awareness is your goal for that campaign, that's great. But if your goal is to drive sales, it's important to pay attention to, okay, is this current marketing effort actually leading to conversions or to the goal that I have set? And look into the data, and that will help you kind of determine whether or not your efforts are making a dent in your goal. There have been a lot of times where I've seen something that looks on the surface like it's going really well, but when you actually look at, okay, maybe we're getting a 3.5% click-through rate on a channel that has an average of, 0.9% click-through rate. But if people are only spending 2 seconds on the website and bouncing, what's wrong? You have to find that disconnect. So make sure to do an audit, make sure that landing pages are in alignment with the messaging. If you have traditional marketing efforts, talk to your reps and see kind of, a lot of times they're really, really great at getting you data about the number of impressions and where the ads were shown. Get all of that information, and that's going to help you solidify your marketing plan and have an idea of where you want to spend your efforts moving forward. So the next step that I really recommend is to create a buyer persona. A lot of businesses, I'm sure, already have this in mind, but for those of you who aren't familiar, essentially what a buyer persona is it's an archetypal representation of your ideal client, or clients plural if you have more than one category. this would be, so say for example, I own a yoga studio in Midtown, and my target demographic, the majority of people who are coming into my studio are young millennial women between the ages of 25 and 35 who are interested in things like health and wellness. So I might create a persona, let's call her Jennifer, and I flesh out the things that she's looking for in a business, what she enjoys about yoga classes, and it just helps you have an idea when you're marketing to talk to a specific person. So for those of you who already have these buyer personas in place, the next step that I recommend is to focus your attention a little bit more on how those needs have shifted due to COVID. So let's get back to Jennifer. So for example, one of the things that she's concerned about is she doesn't know if it's safe for her to come to an in-person yoga class because people are indoors, they're close together, there's a lot of heavy breathing. So how do you as a business rework your buyer personas to include these types of thought processes? What is Jennifer going to be concerned about, and what can you do to help her? The next big step is a competitor analysis. So identify your competitors and figure out what they're doing for their COVID marketing. If you own a business that is a brick and mortar type business like a restaurant, go and do pickup at one of your competitors and just kind of see what the process is like from start to finish. Is it something that you can take pointers from? Are you doing a lot better than they are? Maybe, hopefully. So those are all just kind of things to keep in mind. When it comes to a digital perspective, there's actually a lot of really cool tricks that you can do to see how your competitors are operating. Obviously, the most obvious one is to go on their websites, to go on their social channels, and just kind of scroll through like you would if you were a consumer, see the type of messaging that they're putting out, the tone. But fun fact, on platforms like Facebook, there is a requirement that businesses show transparency. So if you are on a business page, there's a tab that's labeled transparency. If you click on that, you can actually see current ads that your competitors are running on Facebook and Instagram. So this is another great way to get an idea of the type of messaging that your competitors are putting out there. The next big step is defining your unique selling proposition. And again, I know as business owners, you have a unique selling proposition. That's part of your business plan. You know what it is that you guys do well. But again, I want you to think about this in terms of COVID, right? What is it that you are doing differently that your competitors aren't doing? So again, are you offering curbside pickup? Maybe touchless pay points. One of the things that I found for me personally, I'm starting to miss going out with people, right? But I'm still hesitant to go to bars because I just don't know what their safety protocols are like. I don't know if I'm going to get in there and there's going to be people really close together and not wearing masks, or if I have to go up to the bar and touch a bunch of stuff. There's a local brewery that I really like, and their system I think is great. And they publicize this on their social media channels. That's how I knew that I would feel comfortable going there. But they actually offer a really cool program where you come down and you sit at a sanitized table, and there is a QR code on the table that you scan, and it allows you to order your drinks directly from your table without having to get up and interact with anyone. The bartender comes with a mask, puts your drinks down, and you can pay everything touchless. So that I think is, a really great USP for that particular bar, and I would be more likely to go there than to go somewhere else. So think about how that kind of relates to your business. What are you doing differently? So another thing to think about is determining your online brand identity and stance on COVID measures. So this again is a very personal thing, and it depends a lot on this buyer persona and how you think your clients would prefer to communicate on this. So it's a personal stance. I'm not here to tell you to do one thing or another, but just be conscientious, right? So maybe you feel comfortable going out in public and you're ready for things to go back to normal. You have to keep in mind that a good portion of your clients are not. So how can you still be respectful of the circumstances that are going on? What kind of tone are you taking? What sort of imagery are you using? One thing that I've noticed in my experience is when COVID kind of first started happening, we were putting out social media posts that were old photos, right? And we didn't necessarily think that we had to clarify that, but a lot of the comments on the photos were like, okay, well, where are people's masks? So be conscientious of little things like that, right? I mean, if it is an older photo, just make a note of that in the copy. That's okay, but you just have to be conscientious of that. Take advantage of learning tools. I think that that's probably if you only take one thing away from this entire presentation, that there are tools out there that can help you become more adept at marketing. And really there's stuff out there for every level too. So a lot of what I'm covering today are kind of the basics, but if you're ready to get more in depth, LinkedIn Learning is great. I think it's only like $25 a month and you get access to hundreds of courses. You can get really in depth on specific platforms or just have like a broad overview of marketing. Udemy is also great if you're not interested in a subscription model. They have classes that you pay by the class. Usually they're around like $10, so it's very affordable. Google actually has their own educational system now. So if you're looking to learn more about Google Shop ads and Google display ads and everything like that, you can actually go through their academy and earn your certification in the process. So that's a pretty cool thing to be able to do. So once you have gone through and you've established sort of where you're at, your benchmark for right now, it's time to start considering how you can improve. So what you should have gotten essentially by the time that you complete your audits and you go through that entire process is, okay, here's where I am, here's where I want to be. And these next few steps are really going to help you start thinking about how to get from point A to point B. So audiences, this is something obviously that applies across the board. This is something to think about for paid media, for organic media, for different platforms. This is applicable to pretty much every type of marketing that you put out there. So some of the do's and don'ts. So do take advantage of existing data. If you have something like a customer email list or a robust look at your website traffic, maybe you've been established for a decade plus and you have a lot of information at your disposal, use that. Existing customer email lists, I think, are kind of God's gift to marketers. So not only are you able to use email marketing and retargeting marketing to send ads to the customers that you already have to keep your brand top of mind, there's also something called lookalike audiences. So this is true of pretty much every platform. The setup is a little bit different. So I'll use Facebook as an example because I think that's the most straightforward. When you're creating an audience, you can actually upload your email list to Facebook and it will do an analysis. So through Facebook algorithm, if those email addresses are associated with a Facebook profile, Facebook's algorithm will be able to determine similarities between the different accounts. So let's say, for example, going back to that yoga studio, let's say that I thought my demographic was mostly 25 to 35, but my email address list is showing that, there's a really good chunk 55 and up that I maybe haven't been marketing to. So this is a great way to pull in data that maybe, it's not just a broad assumption. These lookalike audiences are great because they share a lot of similarities with the clients that you already have and people who are already interested in your business. So they're more likely to warm up to the idea of your product or your brand than maybe just a cold audience. Insights from website traffic can also be used in a similar way. I think, again, it's important that we don't make assumptions. Google Analytics has a lot of really great information about locations. So you had mentioned, you're advertising locally, but you see people coming in from all over the place. So that'll help you get a picture of, okay, well, these are the areas that are interested. Maybe these are the areas we need to focus on more. So it's a great way to pull data from, say, for example, search terms. So people are coming into your website based on certain keywords. So maybe that'll give you an idea of, okay, well, these people are interested in this particular topic. So let's make sure that I craft information that addresses what my audience actually wants. So another one that, again, seems really obvious, meet your audience where they're at. So for those of you who have established businesses who have all of this data, have customer email lists, you probably have a pretty good idea of who your clients are and the platforms and services that they're utilizing. But for those of you who have newer businesses, don't be afraid to ask. Strike up a conversation with somebody who comes into your store or restaurant, kind of figure out what it is that prompted them to come in. I think people really like being talked to, honestly. For the most part, they like giving their opinion, so it's okay to ask. Another thing to keep in mind is platform. So again, getting back to buyer personas and pulling in data, if you know that based on your data and your buyer persona, that again, your demographic is at 25 to 35 female, what platforms are they going to be on, right? there's a good chance that they're probably on LinkedIn, but if you're a yoga studio, they're not going to be on LinkedIn looking specifically for information about yoga studios. Odds are that particular age group is going to be on Instagram and a little bit on Facebook. If you were a boutique and you were trying to sell clothing to preteens and teenagers, you're not going to want to advertise on Facebook. Kids of that age just aren't on that platform. So if you want to get a better idea of the platforms and the typical demographics that are, existing on them, there's a lot of really great resources out there that kind of give you a deep dive in terms of helping you determine which platforms might be a good fit for your audience. Geography is also kind of a no-brainer. This really applies more for small local brick and mortar businesses. A lot of small businesses, you don't necessarily have the funding to do a large scale marketing campaign. I mean, a lot of my friends own small businesses and their marketing budget is, $100 to $500 a month, maybe. So one of the important things to think about in that case is geography. That's one of the big areas that can help you save money is by narrowing down your geographic target. And this is obviously helpful for situations like yours where you're trying to reach a specific demographic. But again, let's get back to that Midtown yoga studio. We have a $100 budget for the month for digital marketing, and we know that there are a lot of yoga studios in South Reno. So let's maybe exclude South Reno because we know that those individuals are probably going to go to studios that are closer to home, and really focus on like a 10, 15 mile tops radius from Midtown. That'll help you save money while still being able to reach your other demographics and psychographics. Also keep in mind the stage and the buyer journey. So getting back to those personas and having an idea of who your customer is, what are they thinking throughout the different stages, right? So as a yoga studio, maybe they're not aware of my brand yet. So in this awareness phase, for those of you who aren't familiar with buyer journeys, it's typically awareness, consideration, and then conversion. There's a lot of different models, so don't quote me on that. You'll find a lot out there, but that's a good place to start. So in that awareness stage, maybe they're thinking like, gosh, I've been really inactive lately. Like I've been working from home. I haven't been going out. I feel like I need to get up and do something, but they don't know what. So then they see an ad for your yoga studio and it's like, okay, that kind of, sticks in the back of their mind, but maybe they're not ready to commit yet. So kind of just start thinking about, okay, the consideration phase. They know that you exist and they've kind of come to the conclusion that they'd like to take yoga classes. What are you going to say to them that's going to convince them that your brand, that your service is better than your competitors? One of the most important things that you can do is A/B test. So A/B testing is, it's testing one variable in an advertising campaign. So that could be creative, that could be, in this case, audiences. So what I mean by A/B testing, let's say you have the exact same creative, the exact same body copy, exact same landing page, but you want to know which of these audiences perform better. So remember how I was saying that, that lookalike audience was pulling in some information about that, 55 and up crowd that you weren't totally aware of, but that's not necessarily the type of people who you're constantly seeing come in. So where is that disconnect, right? So you can take that lookalike audience and then create another audience that's based on that buyer persona. So again, that 25 to 35 female interested in health and wellness within a certain radius of Midtown. And you can run an A/B test, which will put the exact same amount of money towards both of those ads, and it will tell you which audience performed better and had a better response. That's going to save you a lot of pain and heartache in the future as you start to put more money behind your digital campaigns, because it's going to tell you what isn't effective without you having to, kind of intuitively guess. A couple of the don'ts. So don't solely rely on interest-based targeting. So again, for those of you who have more established organizations that have this client data, great, take advantage of it. Now I know some newer, smaller businesses might not necessarily have all of that information. So that interest-based targeting, which is again, getting back to that buyer persona where you're kind of just giving, you're feeling it out, you're doing it based on what you've seen. That's a great place to start. But once you start to gather data, don't just rely on that. Don't set it and forget it. So I don't mean, go in every month and like fiddle with your audiences, but it's important to take a look, I would say, at least once every 6 months and just kind of say, okay, here's what we've seen, here's some trends that are changing. So for example, with COVID, we've had a lot of shifts in audiences for some of our clients. So some of our hospitality destinations, right? They were originally a big portion that was family travel. A lot of retirees would come, but maybe that's dropped off a little bit. And right now they're seeing actually a lot of interest from meeting and event planners who had events scheduled for this year that got bumped, right? So it's important to not just say, oh, okay, this is what has worked for me. Keep paying attention. So your website, this is obviously another huge component of a marketing campaign and one that I think is often painfully overlooked. So some of the do's here, and again, I know this sounds like a no-brainer, but there are so many websites that don't adhere to these suggestions. So ensure that the content for the website has been optimized for search engines, which I know, no doubt, right? But users need to be able to find your content and information to make informed decisions. So if you have hours of operation, don't have them buried in the middle of a wall of text. Again, you want to make sure that the search engines know what's going on your website. So when search engines do a crawl of your site, make their job easier for them. Help them like determine what's on your page. And that can be done through really, really simple means like setting up headlines and subheadings, right? So just giving people a way to navigate the page quickly, and not from an organic perspective, forget even a search engine crawl perspective. If somebody's on their cell phone and they're trying to find something, if they have a big wall of text and they don't have headlines, they're gonna bounce. They're gonna go find something that's easier. So that's very, very important, which kind of leads to another point. Make sure that your website is mobile friendly. It varies a little bit depending on industry, but the majority, it's like 80 or 90% of people typically are visiting websites from their cell phone. So if you do not have a mobile responsive layout, you're losing business. Speed and performance is another huge one. Again, getting back to bounce rates. If you get into Google Analytics and you see that your bounce rate is at like 90%, figure out why. And a lot of that really comes back to whether or not it's mobile friendly and the load speed time. One of the biggest mistakes that I see people make that affects the speed of your website is uploading photos that are too large. So you want to make sure that your photos are sized for web. They really only need to be, I think it's 72 pixels. Don't quote me on that. You can look it up. Pretty sure it's 72 pixels. And a lot of times people are uploading photos straight out of their DSLR. If you use a site like Squarespace or Wix, I think that they tell you it's a no-no and they won't let you upload it. But if you're doing it, a little bit more from scratch, that could be a big reason why your website is slow. So there are a lot of sites out there where you can actually just input your URL and they'll do a scan of your web page and kind of tell you where your weaknesses are and ways that you can improve them. So that's a super easy fix and something that's really easy to Google. Another thing that, again, is kind of a no-brainer, you want to make sure that you incorporate keywords into your copy. Now, when I say that, I don't mean to keyword load. I know that that's something that we've all seen, especially on really old school website where, again, we're trying to rank for Midtown Yoga Studios. You don't want to write a paragraph that says Midtown Yoga Studios like 4 times in it just in the hope that you're going to rank higher in the search engine. Google is smart. Their AI is really smart. So they see that and they'll actually penalize you for it. So write to real humans. If you want to have more keywords on your website, do something like start a blog. Even if it's just a couple of paragraphs that you put out, once or twice a month, that's going to really help you with your SEO ranking. You can also add tags and metadata to images as well. So like if you go online and you search my name and you click on images, you'll see a lot of photos that I've taken because that metadata is embedded in the photos. And that's just one more way that people can find you. E-commerce websites, for those of you who are dealing with e-commerce, you guys might encounter some issues with previous schedules for shipping and delivery times. Again, it just comes back to making sure that information is updated. If you are short-staffed or if you are seeing longer than expected delivery times, just make a note of that on your website. People are really forgiving right now, but we want to make sure that we live up to our promises. So don't say you have a 3-day turnaround time when that's not true right now. Some of the don'ts, again, we covered this a little bit, but don't have old, outdated information featured on the website. So users right now, particularly right now, are doing a lot of online searches to figure out whether businesses are open, what the restrictions are, if they have to wear masks, if there are limits on how many people can sit at a restaurant table. Make sure that you have all of that information online and easily accessible for people to find. So platforms. Platforms include a wide gamut. So we're talking, Google, Twitter, Facebook. I'm sure you guys are all familiar with the big ones. Some of the do's and don'ts for these. So do's, just like any other business plan, you're really going to want to determine your goals and then choose the platforms to best meet those. So for example, Twitter is a great platform for real life updates or real time updates. So this is something that would maybe be really beneficial for a bar, for example. So let's say, we're heading into cold and flu season and more restrictions are implemented, right? This is a great way for bars or really any businesses to update people as things are happening, because life might change more quickly than you can update the information on your website. So this is a really good way to communicate timely information. Instagram and Facebook stories are great for going behind the scenes. So when you think of Instagram and Facebook, typically the posts that you put out on the newsfeed are going to be more polished, right? It's going to be higher scale photography. You probably wouldn't just do a snapshot from your cell phone and put it up as a post on your Instagram. That just doesn't look polished. But Instagram and Facebook stories are a great way to do that. So an example of a way that you could potentially use Instagram stories, for me, I can sometimes be a little hesitant to go and do curbside pickup if I haven't been to a restaurant before and I don't know what the parking lot situation is like. I don't really know where I'm supposed to wait. So something that you could potentially do in that instance is go through a mock curbside pickup order, right? So you can say, hey, look, I'm in my car. When you pull up, this is what you want to be looking for. And when we come out, don't get out to help us. We'll just put it in your passenger side, whatever. So that's a great way to communicate some pertinent information in a way that's still friendly and personable, so it doesn't feel like you're finger wagging at your clients. And then obviously choose content that is appropriate. So tone is important across the board. Obviously, you're going to put out different messaging on LinkedIn than you would on TikTok or Snapchat, right? So again, seems like a no-brainer, but I've seen a lot of businesses have these faux pas where they post things on LinkedIn specifically. I think is a weird one for that. Things that are just completely not appropriate for the platform, which again, it kind of docks you professionalism points, right? So be conscientious of that. Also pay attention to the specs. So what I mean by that is the actual size of the creative pieces that you're putting out there. So I think we've all probably seen an advertisement or a post at some point where it's cropped funky, you can't read the text, words are being cut off, and you have to click into it to actually see what's going on. Who's really going to take the time to do that if you're just scrolling, right? So it's such an easy thing, but so many businesses overlook it. So again, once you figure out what platforms you want to advertise on, the specs are listed online. You can do a quick Google search and you can figure out what sizes you need. A lot of the different platforms require more than one size, so keep that in mind. So Facebook, for example, has 3 separate sizes. They have squares, they have the long vertical ones that you use for stories, and they also have horizontal ads which show up in news feeds, but they also show up in things like the Facebook Marketplace. So just be conscientious of the fact that it's not a one size fits all. The great thing about this though is that you do not have to be a graphic designer in any way, shape, or form in order to do this. Canva is a really great resource. So I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with it, but for those of you who aren't, essentially it's a click and drag user interface that allows you to create graphic designs. You can even make it branded too. I think they have a paid version where you can upload your own fonts and your own colors. So super easy. You can take the exact same canvas, resize it. You have everything that you need for all of your different advertisements. So don't forget to incorporate multiple platforms that support the buyer journey. So what I mean by that is social media, it's great for every level of the buyer journey, but primarily people use it for awareness. So again, you're scrolling through your news feed, you see a banner, right? So I see that banner for that yoga studio and I'm thinking to myself, I should really check it out because I haven't been moving and that can't be healthy for me. But I'm busy, I don't click on it. But maybe a week later, I'm like, oh shoot, what was the name of that place again? And I do a quick Google search. If you have an advertisement for Midtown Yoga Studio, your ad will show up, hopefully on the top, depending on your bidding strategy, but that's way more advanced than we're going to get into. So that's kind of the goal, right? You want to diversify where your ads are showing up. You can also get really nitty gritty. And for those of you who want to get more advanced, I definitely recommend that you take a look at retargeting and sequential advertising. So that would be something like the example I always give, and I feel like it always makes the men in the room blush, but there's a brand called Thanks, and they are period panties, right? So the first time I got targeted for an ad, I was curious, I clicked on it, I looked at the website, and I was like, all right, well, I'm not gonna commit to this. So I X'd out of it. A few days later, I got a carousel ad that was frequently asked questions. So it was literally exactly what I'd been thinking, like, is this hygienic? Like, how do you wash this? Like, does it smell? Which I know, squeamish, right? But that's an example of sequential targeting or sequential retargeting. So I won't cover that today, but definitely take a look if you're interested in something a little bit more advanced. So last component of this is content. So content is king, and all of the work that we've just put in everything else, picking platforms, defining our audience, figuring out our current standing, is really leading to content and how we can utilize content to really express our messaging. So some of the do's. Again, you want to use your content to address your buyer's pain points and to stress your USP. So Jennifer, she's really nervous about coming in and taking yoga classes in person. It's just not something she's comfortable with. So maybe you put out an advertisement saying, hey, we have, a Zoom-led class twice a week at 7 p.m. Enroll today, right? So we want to be keeping kind of in mind like what our audience needs and how we're going to solve it. Have a brand standard. So again, this is one of those super simple things that's often very, very overlooked. You all look like you're very on top of it, so I'm sure you're good on this front. But with that said, it's important to remember to have consistency across the board. So imagery is a big one. A lot of times I'll see newer businesses, they'll have some really nice professional photos in their Instagram feed right next to a cell phone shot of like a latte in a dimly lit room. And it's just confusing, right? The messaging is confusing, the vision or the visual is confusing. So make sure that you have consistency. Now I'm not saying you have to go out and do a professional photo shoot, multiple times, but invest in a ring light for your cell phone. Just little tweaks, learn about composition. Tone, again, that's gonna vary a little bit from platform to platform, but you still want it to sound like the same brand, no matter who is responding or posting. You need to make sure that you have guidelines for your employees so that everybody's kind of on the same page with how things should sound. Are you using emojis? Are you going to use exclamation points? These are all things that should be outlined. Hashtags, another big one. So for example, for your work, you want to identify and target a local audience. So maybe do some research into local hashtags for Instagram and Twitter. Reno is rad, Reno NV. What are hashtags that locals are using and how can you utilize those to increase your local marketing efforts? Branded hashtags are also great, but I really recommend that you do a little bit of research on those before you commit to one. So as an example, we have a client up in Tahoe who really wanted to use the hashtag Tahoe Life. So we did a little research. Tahoe Life is a group that is associated, might be a little bit different, but it's associated with Chevy Tahoe owners, right? And it's a very heavily used hashtag. So we don't want to be associated with Chevy Tahoe. Like that's not what we're trying to do. So make sure you're not co-opting somebody else's hashtag for your own use, because then when people search for that, they're going to be really confused why you're showing up. And then responses. Again, this gets back to employee participation, and even for yourself, maybe take a look at some of the emails and some of the comments that you've gotten and your most frequently asked questions and just write out some canned responses. Now, I don't want you to just copy and paste those responses every time somebody has a question, but it'll help give you bullet points to craft a message without having to be like, oh my God, I totally forgot how much that costs or like what the requirements are. It's just super helpful because I know that we're all busy. Provide a high level of customer service. One of the big things here is don't let messages go unanswered. I think that's something that is really painful for me. I find that I've gotten advertisements where it's just a wall of negative comments, a wall of negative reviews, and not a single peep from the brand. Don't let that happen. And this goes for organic content too. If somebody has a question, if they were in person, if they were in your bank branch, or if they were in a store and they came up to you with a question, you wouldn't ignore them just because you were busy. So the same applies for the digital world as well. Transparency is huge too. So let customers know what changes you've been making due to COVID to accommodate, their needs and their safety. I think it's okay to be honest too. Let's say you're working for a business and you guys have been impacted really hard by COVID. it's okay to express that, right? If you are short-staffed and wait times are longer than normal, it's okay to say that. The one sort of caveat that I would say there is don't put a negative spin on it, right? Don't do a, woe is me kind of post. I've been seeing a lot of those lately, and I feel as a consumer like I'm being guilt tripped into like visiting their store or something. Don't take that approach, but it is okay to be honest. And it's kind of nice because it gives us as consumers an idea that brands like, hey, there are real people behind here, and supporting them over Amazon is going to mean, that their kids get to have Thanksgiving this year, right? So the don'ts here, right? Or excuse me, the last one, support your paid efforts with organic messaging. So again, this just gets back to the fact that if you are paying for advertisements, the intent of advertisements, most of the time, unless you're remarketing to your email lists or to your page followers, is to acquire a new audience. Don't neglect the one that you already have, right? Put in the time and effort to post regularly to your Instagram pages, to your Facebook pages. If you do email newsletters, don't let those fall by the wayside. Like, these are really good ways to stay connected to the community who already supports you. And remember, in marketing, I know you all know this, it's way easier to sell a product or a service to somebody who is already familiar with your brand than it is to acquire new business. So as far as the don'ts, don't be all sales all the time. Add value. This is especially true when it comes to social media pages, right? As a consumer, I'm not going to follow a page when every single post that they have is like, hey, buy this, hey, sign up for this. So if I were the owner of that Midtown yoga studio, maybe weekly I post a guided meditation, a highlighted yoga pose of the week, an essential oil that they'll be using in the diffuser and what the benefits are, right? And then maybe 1 or 2 posts about like a refer a friend code or, the Zoom classes, right? So you want to find a nice balance between obviously trying to gain new business, but still supporting your followers. Another don't is being insensitive to or avoidant of current fears and regulations surrounding COVID. So what I mean by that is, again, getting back to those pictures that we had posted of people without masks, right? That made a lot of people bristle. So just be conscientious of the type of content that you're putting out there, and just understand that everybody has varying levels of comfort, and ignoring what's going on. Maybe that is the approach that you do take. And again, that's not something that I can speak to for you. That is really going to depend a lot on your clientele and what you think that they need. My immediate assumption, though, based on the conversations that I've been having, not only with businesses, but friends who are obviously consumers, is that we appreciate it when businesses acknowledge, like, hey, it's weird out there right now, right? And again, being human about it too. I think that that's honestly one of the best things that you can do right now, is foster that sense of community and, hey, we're here for each other. So in summation, obviously marketing changes on a super regular basis. There are new rules and regulations that are coming out from the state. Google and Facebook for a little while wouldn't let you market things like hand sanitizer because it was considered sensational. So you're always going to have to think about having to pivot, right? And one of the great things about digital marketing is it allows you to do that. And it really allows you to meet your clients or your potential clients where they're at. And it's super easy to pivot that messaging too. We don't have those hindrances like you do have with traditional media. So I want you guys to really think about, putting in the effort up front, doing all of those tasks that I outlined at the beginning, like the audits and figuring out your USP and everything, because the more clear you are with where you are and where you want to go, the easier it's going to be to fill in those steps in between. Awesome. Cool.
Great. Thank you so much, Kambrya.
Yeah, I know I got a little bit of a late start, so I apologize. There's not quite as much time for questions as I would have liked, but I'm happy to answer any if we have any in person first before we get to the folks online.
Awesome. And just a reminder to you, if you're online, to go ahead and enter your questions into chat, and we will get to them at the end. So without further ado, if anyone has any questions in-house.
I've got a question.
Sure.
So there's a lot of different platforms that you can advertise on, and you talked a little bit about finding the best one based on your customer base.
Mm-hmm.
How do you do that? How do you recommend finding the best platform?
So I think a little bit of that just comes into research, right? So for financial services, I think one of the greatest ways that you can reach people is a lot of times when people are looking for a financial service, they're already in that consideration stage, right? They already know that they need a small business loan or a home loan. You don't have to work quite as hard as that awareness level as if you were like a restaurant or something. So when you're thinking about, okay, where are people at when they're in that consideration phase? I would say if you could really only implement one type of marketing, search engine marketing is going to be huge, because people go in, they type in, where do I find a small business loan, right? So that's a big one. The cool thing is that, Google, obviously there's a lot of different routes that you can take. If you do display ads, you can actually target, and those are, the banner ads that show up on the side of a website. You can actually target that by content. So maybe people aren't searching out like specifically like business loans, like maybe they're just looking into how to start a small business, right? So you can actually target those banner ads based on keywords and based on content. So that would be a great place to start if you're in that awareness phase. These people, they know they're in consideration. This lets them become aware that you offer those services. Then from there, work on something like search engine marketing. I prefer Google over Bing. If you have the budget for it, it's great to do both. Google has, like 90% of the share though, so Bing is tertiary. Obviously with Google, you can search by, or you can target by keyword. So search queries are huge. You can also target by audiences too. And this is really great because it utilizes Google's AI, and it'll say, okay, well, we know that this individual is interested or in market for a business loan based on their searches, right? So you can narrow it down by more than one category. So you can have keywords, you can have audiences. With financial institutions, it gets a little funky with targeting. In my experience, we can still use audiences. It still passes compliance as long as your geographic and demographic targeting are broad enough. So what I mean by that is you can't exclude by age or by gender, obviously, and you can't narrow down by something like household income, like you could maybe for selling a car. But audiences are fine because that's general enough. You're not excluding anyone. It's just helping you narrow it down. So I would say display and search would be really good places for you to go. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much.
So we really schedule with conversion with our paid ads on Facebook. And so we see like really high engagement. We see people tagging people. We see people like engaging positively with what we're sharing, but they're not actually converting into like the channel we're trying to direct them into. And so like, is that a content issue? Is that just run-of-the-mill paid ads, that's what happens, or?
It could be a combination of a few things. What type of business is it?
So, well, I'm a nonprofit, but we have a donation collection piece of our business. So you can donate clothing, household goods, furniture, and we'll come to your house, pick it up for free, and take it away.
Okay, cool. So there are a few different areas that I would potentially look into. One, yes, content. That could definitely be it. Again, getting back to that A/B testing, this could be a really good time for you to figure out, okay, well, is it content, right? So maybe come up with a couple of different versions of your ad copy, a couple of different of like the imagery or the graphics that you're using, and test that out to see if some of them have more conversions than others. When you're setting up the advertisements, you said you were setting it up with the conversion goal from the get-go, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I would say continue to do that as your primary, but another thing that you could potentially do too is maybe the individuals who are seeing your ads are not far enough down their buyer journey yet, right? So maybe you're hitting them at that awareness stage. Maybe we just need to flesh out your campaign a little bit more. So maybe you have something that does focus more on brand reach or brand awareness. And then from there, we can retarget individuals, because you said your campaign is getting a lot of activity, right?
Yeah.
So people who have shown interest on those ads, Facebook and Instagram, they'll actually let you retarget people who have interacted with previous advertisements. So that's a good way to further drive those people down the funnel. So those folks who have been interested and have expressed interest but aren't ready to commit to a donation yet, you retarget them with another ad with a stronger call to action, right? And you can keep doing that. So let's say from that point, that goal of that second ad is traffic. So the first one is awareness and reach. The second one is traffic. You're driving them to a landing page where they can learn more about your donation services. So maybe they'll convert from there, in which case, if you want to get really complex here, you would install a Facebook event pixel. So let's say when people go to the website, they fill out a form to give a donation. They fill out their contact information. once it takes you to the thank you page, you should have a piece of code on there for Facebook that lets the Facebook pixel know, okay, this individual has completed this conversion. Let's not waste any more money contacting them, right? But let's say that there are people who reach that page from that secondary ad, but they're still not converting. We'll serve another ad and we add an exclusion in that audience list. We're retargeting website traffic except for people who visited the thank you page. And that's a good way to use what I had mentioned earlier, that method of sequential marketing, right? So the message is going to change, that call to action is going to change. And once you get farther down the funnel, don't think of this as something that's going to cost you a lot of money, because once you get further down the funnel, your traffic is going to be a lot smaller, right? There's not going to be that many people. So depending on the size of your organization, I mean, maybe it's even like $50 a month to reach those final people. But if you're getting conversions at that level, like that's worth it. So that would be my recommendation. So try doing that, you know, the sequential marketing to hit people at different points, because it sounds like they just need more contacts before they pull the trigger. And if that doesn't help, or, you know, in addition to do some A/B testing at each of those different levels to figure out, again, audiences and creative, I think are the two big ones there. Yeah.
Cool. All right, any other questions from anyone in house?
I think mine's too specific that wouldn't benefit anyone else, so I would ask later.
Yeah, oh, I would say just go for it. We've got time, and there aren't any questions on chat, so please.
When it comes to, so really mine would be someone needing to look at my website to answer questions as to why things aren't working or why other things are, but so no, I don't think I have.
Okay. Fair enough.
You have my contact information in the packet that's in there. If you have a specific question about your website, I can connect you with somebody from our web team who is more experienced with that side of marketing. Obviously, we can't get into like a full consultation, but they can direct you to some resources that can help you out. So feel free to reach out to me and I'll get you in touch with somebody. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, once again, it looks like we don't have any questions in chat, but we do have some next steps that we want to let folks know about. And so I'm going to go ahead and invite Barbara to come up and talk to us for a second. She's going to let us know a little bit more about the Chamber EDU extra credit session that she'll be doing this coming Tuesday at 11 a.m. In regard to optimizing your e-commerce operations.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. So yeah, next week I'm going to be hosting an extra credit to kind of extend this topic. Today we talked a lot about marketing. I'm going to talk about how to pivot the way customers are paying you. So maybe today you don't have an option for contactless. Maybe you haven't built an online presence yet. I work for Wells Fargo Merchant Services, and we have a lot of options to help you. So next week, tune in and I'll give you guys some tips on how to accept payments and kind of pivot based on what's happening in our current world with COVID.
All right, thank you. All right, so with that, I think we'll go ahead and sign off. Thank you so much to our digital audience for joining us today. The next Chamber EDU session we've got is on mental health in the workspace. And honestly, I think, I don't know what everyone is experiencing online or in person, but I know that the sense that I get is that a lot of folks feel like they're in a holding pattern, they're floating in the ether, they're working from home, or adhering to a lot of protocols that are unfamiliar, and there's a lot of stress and anxiety associated from that. When is this going to end? How do I cope? And so I think a lot of what we're going to be focusing on is not only ways to more healthily cope with our current situation and our current anxieties as individuals, but also how we as employers or team members can better care for the people on our teams and the people we're working with. How to identify if someone's in trouble, how to identify if someone needs a little bit of help, and how to show up for folks when they need us. So thank you everyone once again for joining us. Hope to see you in November for Chamber EDU on mental health in the workspace, and we will sign off. Thank you.
Kambrya, I do have one question.